What was the biggest hurdle in the campaign? Was it being an outsider, being a woman, being both?
Uh, D, all of the above. My career's rise was fast and powerful, like a hurricane gaining strength. But like every storm, it has its turning point. Welcome to Through the Hurricane. I'm Kathleen Kane, and this is our second episode of the Flip the Script, where we have Alexandra Golfer as our co host, and she is now asking me the questions uh, that will let you know how we got to where we were. Alexandra?
Yeah, hi, great to be here again. In the first episode, we talked about your upbringing, your childhood in Scranton, you going off to law school, what made you do that, and then the shift of coming back from Philly to Scranton to work in the DA's office. Now, you said you primarily worked in child abuse and sex abuse crimes. Can you give me a little bit of why? I mean, that seems like an awful thing to see every day, 8 hours a day.
Yeah, and it's funny, people used to say to me, "I don't know how you could do those, how you could prosecute those crimes. I don't know how you could be in that unit." Almost like it was, a bad thing for me, and my answer always is, "How could you not? How could you not be in that unit, and how could you not have the most vulnerable of victims, in your care, and you have to take them up and let them tell their story?" So, to me, that was an honor. The DA's office, as I said before, was the just best job in the world. I'd do it all over again if I could, and I think it really showed me that life is I didn't have an easy upbringing, but after seeing how other people live, it showed me that, there is a whole other world out there that a lot of us don't see, and actually, thankfully so, because when I decided I was going to leave the DA's office, part of the thing that got me through it, because it was a tough decision for me, was I never have to see anything bad like that again, and that was just one of the bright lights about it.
Was it hard not to take your work home with you?
When you're a prosecutor, your work is you. You really it's day and night. You're on call for a week at a time. You're up all night long. You have to go to crime scenes and then you have to take the case. And it doesn't matter if you work until 6 in the morning, you're back up at 8. So I did take my work home with me. And I remember even when I was pregnant with my first son, for some reason, some of these cases hit me even harder. So life did collide in that respect.
Now, I'm sure with child abuse, sex abuse crimes, you dealt with a lot of kidnappings as well. Were there certain precautions you took with your kids, that you were made privy to by your job?
My life was actually threatened a few times before I even had children, so at that point, I was an old hat at it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I know I'm not making light of it because it was a little bit scary, but we were such a family at that point, with all of the prosecutors and the police officers, and they took it seriously too. I really felt like they took good care of me and kept a good eye out for me, and I actually felt pretty safe after I had my children, and even more so when I was the attorney general. I mean, I was getting so much attention, and that brings all the bad parts too. That brings all of the people who just get fixated on certain things. We had a whole roll of it was like a big keychain, and it had laminated pictures of all of the credible threats against me. And every now and then, my protection detail would have me look at it and say, if you see this person at your door, we just want you to be aware that this is who it is. It was a little daunting. And,
Yeah.
I was more afraid for my children at that point. And I also made them very aware of the precautions that they needed to take
Yeah, I mean, you see anyone at your door that you know is not supposed to be there, it's a little frightening.
a little bit.
Yeah, I know when we were younger, obviously my mom worked in the DA's office too, and she would just routinely say, if someone comes up to you and says, I lost, my puppy, can you come help me? And my sister Taylor would be like, no, absolutely not, stranger danger. And I'd be like,
Yeah.
well, and it's funny because your boys, I feel like, are the same. Whereas Zach, the youngest, would be like, absolutely not, get away from me. And Christopher would kind of be like, is there candy involved?
I was just going to say if there was candy involved, he's all over that. But, we also had a plan. I said, "The o if something happens to me or if you needed to go someplace safe, this is the only detective I would send for you. don't go with anybody else but him. And we would practice it. I'd have the detective would come by our house every now and then, and or other people would go by our house and be like, "Hey," just to test them out. And they were pretty good at it. They also became old hats after a while. At a certain point, there was a hit out on law enforcement when I was attorney general, and that was really, really scary because it was in our area, not just in the state. And we had 24/7 protection, and the boys actually, felt pretty safe about it. They really respected the fact that we were being taken care of as well as we were, but they also got to see another part of life too that a lot of kids fortunately don't get to see.
Yeah, and it's a fine line between taking precautions and making your kids aware, but you don't want to scare them. Like, you don't wanna be afraid of life.
Well, you know what? And that's exactly right. And that's what I actually feel like today's episode is about, because we're going to be talking about how, my life was pretty good. It was kind of that rise, and then have this historical election and everything is amazing. And we're doing such great things in the office and I love my job. And, then as life typically does, takes a really bad turn. And what I, feel about that is I know I'm jumping ahead of ourselves, but people would say to me all the time, if you knew now what you knew then, if you knew this was going to happen, would you do it again?
Would you? Don't leave us hanging, would you?
Well, I know that I should say no, that I would run for the hills and absolutely not. And, that was horrible. Um, Thankfully, we don't have the luxury of 2020 hindsight in our lives. I mean, thankfully, people say if you knew a childbirth was going to bring that pain, you wouldn't do it again, right? But then we go and do it again. So with the hindsight, I could honestly say that yes, yes, I would do it again. Would I do some things differently? Absolutely, but I would do it all over again because becoming coming back to the theme of the show, I think fear is a very gripping, awful thing, and I think it stops you from living your life. And despite the fact that my life turned out to be something I never, ever would have imagined, it still baffles me. It's still shocking. You know, um, I would still do it again because there were parts that really did mean something to me. And, there were things that I thought we did that if I wasn't there, it wouldn't have gotten done. And would I then say to those mothers, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to do what's easier for me or what's better for me? Probably not.
Yeah,
It's,
you know what's interesting? You mentioned childbirth. I'm not sure if it's a chemical that gets released, but something in the woman's brain forgets how traumatic childbirth was so that you keep reproducing.
yeah,
And, your brain will always protect yourself. And you have a guest coming on later who's going to talk about PTSD and trauma responses. And you do have to know, like, you have all the resources in you. It's just about really honing them. And it's funny saying when people say, like, would you do it all over again? To me, like, that doesn't even matter. Like, everyone has their path.
right.
Your destiny's kind of lined up for you. Like, this is going to happen no matter what. There's no point in thinking about whether it should have or would have happened. But to move along a little bit, because this is so interesting to me, you worked in the DA's office and then you went home to raise the boys. Now, was that like you woke up one day and you were like, I just want to be home with the boys? Or was it your job starting to wear on you? Like, what made you make that switch?
I was in the DA's office for 12 years, and I was juggling raising 2 boys, and working. You know, uh, One time I remember I was pregnant with Zach. Christopher was, maybe 16 months old, and I had a rape trial. I had to be in the courtroom at 9 o'clock. It was 20 of 9. The babysitter did not show up. Their dad was already gone to work, and I was panicking. And many times I would actually have to throw Christopher in the carrier and take him to work. I'd grab some bottles. I'd walk into the DA's office and say to, the very responsible people there, I'll be down at the break at 10 o'clock. He needs a bottle at 9 o'clock. I'll see you when I get back. And, we were all such a family. We took care of each other like that. But it was hard. It was really difficult. And it got to the point in not just my career, but I think in our family life that it was time to admit to myself that I could not be good at doing all of these 3 things at the same time, and, there were 3 of them, and one of them had to give, and it had to be my job. And it was difficult. I remember coming home from the shore, the sun was setting, and I was like, "Okay, this is it. I'm going to have to leave." So it was difficult, but at the same time, it was rewarding because, love I love being a mother, and I loved being home with the boys, and let me tell you something, going to work was a hell of a lot easier than staying home all day with 2 boys. So, it wasn't like I was on vacation then, but at a certain point, I really did miss what I did, and even the boys, I think it was only 6 months into it, into my retirement, the boys were like, "Oh my god, mom, when are you going back to work? You need to get a job." And I was kinda like,
Is
"Whew,
that sad?
thank God you said that because yes, I do."
Yeah, I mean, I know you obviously felt grateful that you had the opportunity to be a stay-at-home mom,
Yeah,
not a lot of people, especially in our area, get that. But the flip side to it, I know you so well. You are someone that has to be both mentally and physically stimulated every day. I
yeah,
know we talk almost every day, and you say to me, I am so physically tired at the end of the day, and I'm so happy about that. Like,
right.
you are someone that just has to keep going. And of course, raising kids, especially 2 young boys, that's physically demanding. But where did you get the mental stimulation from while you were raising them? Was it, just reading? Like, did you try to get involved, listen to my mom's or friends' cases? Because there's no way that passion just goes away.
It wasn't, and, we were still all good friends at the DA's office, and we still are, and so, yes, I would listen to them, they'd call, "What do you think about this?" And I just kind of give my opinion on it, but it actually I was a stay-at-home mom for about 6 months when the boys told me go back to work, and, I worked on a political campaign after that, which oddly enough, speaking of childbirth, that's what working on a political campaign is like, you're like, oh my god, I would never wanna be involved in that, and it was a presidential campaign, and I remember thinking, "This is wild." The behind the scenes things that no one knows about, and they're not supposed to because it's just, like, one chaotic event after another, was like, "Oh my god, I'll never do that again, I'll never do it." I ended up doing it for about a year,
Mhm.
and then I went back to being a stay-at-home mom. But again, at a certain point, I was kind of like, maybe I should go back to the DA's office, or I don't know what I wanted to do. And somebody approached me about running for Congress. And I was thinking about it. I thought, yeah, I like to be involved in the process and I love government. And, I love that I just love that you could do something, and I'm also a big complainer, by the way. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm like, "Oh, I love the government." I don't. I'm a massive complainer about the government. The process isn't working, this isn't working right, or what is going on here that's against the Constitution. I'm always like that. And I was kind of like, well, you know what? You're always saying we need better people. And if you think you could do it better, then do it better. Like I said, I don't know if I told the story yet, but stop me if I did. When I would sit at the boys' football games, I'd sit next to my father. And, I'd always be like, "Why are they running that play again? That play never works," and blah, blah, blah. He just looked at me and he goes, "You know what? If you think you could be the coach better, get down there and be the coach." And it's kind of the same thing in politics. If you're going to complain about it, you think you could do it better, well, then go and do it better. So the Congress didn't really work out. I mean, I have to go to Washington. The boys were too young. It just the logistics of it wasn't going to work. Was I disappointed when I came to that realization? I was disappointed. But then I always knew, okay, well, something else will come along.
Yeah, and, you're such like an old-fashioned Democrat, kinda like a
Ouch.
No, 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 in, like, the true sense of, like, a Democrat, like JFK, you know what I mean? Because normally nowadays Democrats are very pro-government, anything they do and say, it's refreshing that you're still so moderate and you see both sides. You're
Yeah.
like, "I'm not gonna get on board with this just because it's what my party believes right now."
Well, you know what? I'm a human. I'm a human
Yeah.
first. We all are. And I don't care what you label me. And when I was running for attorney general, people would say, well, you're a Democrat. I like you. Or you're a Democrat. I don't like you. And my answer was always like, the law is the law. It's not a
Yeah.
Republican or Democratic. The law is the law. Call me whatever you want. I had to pick one to run. So, yeah. And this is what my father was and, his father was. But let's talk about the issues and let's talk about the law. So, yeah. Just be a human being.
Yeah, and just be an ideas person at the end of it, don't hate the person or don't love the person, just focus on their ideas.
Well, I have a better idea even than that. Let's be a solutions person.
Yeah, well, yeah. Baby steps.
Yeah, right.
So, how long were you a stay-at-home mom before
Mm.
the election? Before you even decided to run?
Oh, easily 3 years, 3 and
Okay.
a half years.
So then walk me through the thought process because there's no way you just woke up one day and said, I'm going to be the first woman Democratic Attorney General of Pennsylvania.
No. But again, someone else approached me and said, "I think you would be a good attorney general." And I basically was, have you been drinking? Why would you possibly think that? I'm this former assistant district attorney from Scranton, Pennsylvania. Literally, no one knows my name. How could I possibly win a statewide election? We have 13 million people in Pennsylvania. And I said, walk me through the math of it because it doesn't just being a good candidate or having good ideas, which he said, you do, and you have the experience. And I want to know the math of it. How can I win? Because I'm not wasting my time, my family's time, or anyone else's time if it's never going to work. I'm not the sacrificial lamb, let's put it that way, right?
Yeah.
So he went through all that and, Chris and I talked about it and we talked to the boys about it and see if our family could handle it. And yeah, we were all on board. Like, yeah, let's do it. And honestly, it was a really long shot. There's no doubt. We did an initial poll, and I mean, somebody was 34%, and I think I was 11%. It was the name recognition. It's only because Pittsburgh has a hospital named Kane that I even got that 11%. But it was still kind of funny, and I love a challenge.
Mhm.
I love call me the underdog all day long because that's where I thrive.
So when you ask them, why me? Like, what do you see in me? What was his answer?
Well, his answer was, is you have experience.
Mhm.
You're on the front line. You've done all of that. This is a law enforcement job. He felt exactly like I did. It's a law enforcement job. I was a lawyer long enough at that point, and he said, I think that you could have good solutions to the problems. You see the problems. You've been there. And I thought, "Yes, you're right, I could." Now, I wasn't that my ego wasn't that big that I was just like, "Okay, yeah, let's do it." I literally went home and Googled every single elected attorney general to see what their resume was, to see whether I could hold up to it, whether my resume would hold up, and then I was like, "Yeah, okay, I could do this."
When you looked at the past attorney generals and you looked at their credentials and the qualities that they have, did you see any of those qualities in yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and this is back to party again. It was all held by the Republican Party. There had never been an elected Democrat before. And I know that that should be like, oh, well, there are massive differences between, how they did it and how you would did it, how you would do it. No, but there were, we had a lot of good attorney generals. But at that point, I also felt like we needed to change things up a little bit because the drug problem was really out of control more so than 20, 30 years ago. There were things that were coming up. The gangs were out of control. And I just felt like we couldn't keep doing the same things. Let's try and change it up a little bit. Let's do it a little different.
What was the biggest hurdle in the campaign? Was it being an outsider, being a woman, being both?
Uh, D, all of the above. Being a woman, was very difficult. No one took me seriously. I remember they said at one point I was at a campaign stop and somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, this one is saying that you're nothing but a rich, bored housewife." And I was like, "Wow." I said, "Okay, well, I am a housewife because I am married and we have a house and we're not rich, but we're not poor either. So, okay, you got me on two of the three." I said, "But bored? No, I'm not bored. I'm the mother of 2 sons. I'm involved in our community. I'm not bored." And that kind of put it a stop to it, but it was all a challenge. I mean, being a woman was very difficult in what was a man's world at that point. Being a Democrat was difficult because no Democrat had ever won, and people don't want to get behind a loser. So I had to try and convince them that I think I could win, and here's how. Running statewide was difficult because we have a very large state. We're the fifth most populous state in the country. So getting out there and getting my name and doing it was a lot of hard work. I loved every second of it. And just making sure that the boys were, happy and healthy. And our goal was let's keep them alive during the campaign. And I, we met our goal.
Now you have a pretty big circle of family and friends.
Mhm.
Was everyone on board with you running?
I think so. When I announced to every our family and friends at a Sunday dinner that I was running for attorney general, your mom at the time was a deputy attorney general, and I'm not sure she was crazy about me becoming her boss at a certain point. I doubt it. And everyone else was like, "Oh, that's wonderful." And then I could hear them whispering to each other, "What does the attorney general even do?"
I had no idea. When you mentioned attorney general, the only thing I kept thinking of was the general in those insurance commercials. I was like, "But she's never even been in the army." Like, I don't understand it. Now, granted, I was, like, 14 at the time. I probably should have known, but I did not. So your election or your campaign, sorry, was it a slow build and then you took off? Because I know you really gained momentum and it was just off to the races, but was it a slow build or as soon as you got your name out there, everyone was on board?
No, it was a very slow build. I had a great campaign team from, Philadelphia. We were small, as we would say. We were small but mighty because we were really watching the money. We
Mhm.
knew that in the beginning, there's a rise and fall in campaigns. You don't wanna peak too soon because then by the election comes, you're done. So we knew it would take a lot of hard work, and I would have to hit every, campaign stop that I possibly could, talk to as many people. So it was very slow, but I was patient, which is not really my strongest quality. And we just kept building and just kept talking to people. And the more I talked to people, the more I realized exactly what people were looking for. And I think that when it did hit its peak, which was around maybe February of right before the election, people were so excited about the election. They were excited to have me on the campaign trail. It was somebody different, and it just showed me it was almost shocking to me. I'll tell you this quick story about a rally I was at too. It was almost shocking to me how badly people needed a change and wanted a change. I was at a campaign rally and it was a presidential election at the time. Barack Obama was running, which was, historic in and of itself. But I was there with Bill Clinton, and I was introducing Bill Clinton, but my speech was, I don't know, I got a little off on it. It was in Scranton, it was my hometown. We were all, you know, I was quoting Bruce Springsteen for God's sakes. It was like, 5,000 people cheering, and he comes out and he's like, I don't know how I'm gonna top that. I'm like, "Well, somehow I think you're going to, and you'll pull it together." And we laughed, and after the campaign rally after the rally, a lady, an older woman from I think she was from York, came up to me with her granddaughter, and she's like, "Oh, I want you to meet my granddaughter." And I said, "That's wonderful you traveled all that way to meet, to see the president, the former president." She goes, "Oh, no, we came to see you." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "You're going to be the first woman elected. I want my granddaughter to see that she could do it too." I seriously, just like I am now, 10 years later, almost in tears, and I was terrified at that point because now it isn't just election, it isn't just me, it means so much more to people, and, that was a heavy thing to carry.
So do you remember election night? I mean, what stands out to you as the moment you realize like, "Oh my gosh, I just won?"
It's almost I'm not one of those people who panic at the time or kind of celebrate at the time. I'm one of those people who are like, I remember my first thought was, okay, where's Zach's jacket and why doesn't he have it on?
Mhm.
Knowing Zach, he took it off and threw it somewhere. Now we need somebody to find Zach's jacket. Literally, that was my first thought. And I'm going to be perfectly honest. The second they said, it's been called, you won, my very first thought was, "Oh, shit. Here we go." because I
Yeah.
knew it wasn't going to be a cakewalk.
Mhm.
The campaign was bruising, bruising campaign. And if that was just the campaign, I kind of knew what was coming. And then they came out and said, "You got over 3 million votes." And I'm like, "Okay, is that good?" And they're like, "Yeah, I mean, the last person to get that was, I think, one of the Caseys and LBJ maybe. You're only the 3rd person to get that." I'm like, "Okay, that's cool. Let's find Zach's jacket, let's get out there and let's get this done. Let's get this job started."
Did you at all have a little bit of, like, buyer's remorse when they said you won? Kinda like, "Oof."
It was like it wasn't buyer's remorse because that's what I had worked for and I really wanted the job, but I knew it was going to be, really tough coming up. I didn't by any means think I was going to walk into this beautiful situation where everybody was so happy to see me.
What would make you think that? Yeah, I think with a situation like that, just knowing myself, I would just be like, "Yeah, great. Can I just go to sleep now? I'm gonna eat, like, a full meal and just go to sleep."
Yeah. Well, we didn't save weight, yeah.
Yeah. So from election night to your first day, what was the span of time in between?
I believe it's, 3 months,
Okay.
something like that.
So you took on some very high profile cases right off the bat.
Yeah.
Now, was that at all strategic? Like, I'm coming in and I mean business, or it was just, wow, this is where we're at right now?
This is where we're at right now.
Okay.
They came to me, as I say, they landed on my desk and, they had to be dealt with.
Yeah, I think with cases like that, though, most people would just kind of like push them off a little bit. You don't want to rock the boat too early, but I admire that you're like, no, this is what needs to get done, and I'm doing it right now.
Well, don't admire it too much because my thought process at that time actually was, you know what? My time here is limited. Number 1, if I'm lucky, I have 4 years, right? If I'm lucky. Number 2, I know how ugly this is. I thought I knew how ugly it was. You may not even have that amount of time. So let's get things done when they need to get done because your time could be very limited. I went to see Mayor Bloomberg at the time had given a big campaign contribution. And well, I was in New York at the time before I took office, and we stopped in to say hello and say thank you for it. And I noticed that he first I had a bullpen kind of office setup, and I was like, what's with this? And he said, I need my people to talk to each other because housing, if they hear somebody's having a problem over here, they may talk to each other and solve the problem. I thought that's brilliant. But more so, he had this big clock up on the wall, and it was a counting backwards, the months, the days, the hours. And I said, what is that all about? He said, our time is very limited. I want everyone to know that every single day counts here. And when you look up at that and you say, "Oh my god, we only have, 3 years, 6 months, and 5 days left," you're going to start working. And I said that it was brilliant. So I did look into having a clock. It was expensive. I didn't want the taxpayers to have to pay for it, and nor did I want to have to pay for it, but it stuck in our minds. And I told everyone there about the clock, and we knew that we had to get things done. Every day counted.
It's funny when you say that, I think of The Grinch, where they have that big clock in Whoville and it says, 361 days until Christmas, and everyone stops and panics. They go out buying everything. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I only have limited amount of time." Now, obviously, there's a chance you might not get reelected, but what made you think you might not have the 4 years?
Honestly, I didn't care about being reelected.
Yeah.
My priority was, a term, and then who cares what happens after that? If you're doing a good job and the voters want you, okay, we'll carry on. But at that point, it was 4 years because politics is ugly, and because had I rocked the boat. There's no doubt about it. I mean, there was a hornet's nest, and I took the bat and started swinging at it. And you have to be ready. You can't be so naive to think that you're not going to get stung. So I knew that that was going to happen. And it wasn't like I had these facts in front of me. I had some, but for the most part, it was my gut.
That's so interesting. So when the national media spotlight turned on you, how did you handle the attention? I mean, that has to be just for me, it would be debilitating, right? But
Yeah,
I think by the campaign, you were used to it, but now everyone knows your name. And they didn't just, talk about your successes in the media. I remember like almost every article about you, they would mention what you were wearing. The one said,
yeah.
Kathleen Kane steps out with striking highlights. Like,
Or
did you
my
just,
signature suit, they called
oh
it
my
once. Like, during the
gosh.
trial, they reported she had her signature suit on. I'm like, "I didn't even know I had a signature suit." But, yeah, it was kind of I mean, the spotlight was all different directions. It was a little bit of the good that we were doing. It was, I'd say 20% made the first year anyway, and then, then it became virtually down to nothing. But, yeah, my personal life, our divorce was splashed all over the newspapers. Everywhere I went, there was literally no privacy anymore, and it was a national spotlight too, which at a sometimes it's kind of cool. Sometimes it's like, "Oh, wow, this is great," and you enjoy the attention until it turns, and then, you just kind of wanna say, "Just give me a breath. Let me take a breath," and because your kids see that, and their friends see it, and their teachers see it, and it's a lot to deal with. So it's flattering in one way, and in another way, I wouldn't say it was debilitating, but you have to watch. I was at Governor Scranton's funeral, and his son gave the most beautiful eulogy I ever heard. But he said that his father always said, "It takes a lot of courage to be joyous in our business because the spotlight's always on you." And they loved to dance. Governor Scranton loved to polka, by the way. And which, that's not a popular dance, but he loved to polka and he wasn't doing it with his wife. And they were he's like, "No, you know what? I don't care what people think." So it took a lot of courage to be joyous and to live your life as you wanted to and to dress how you wanted to. But I remember at a certain point, I was kind of like, I want to just throw jeans and a t shirt on and go to Lowe's.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
completely understand that. I mean, you could and then just say you were my mom if someone runs into you.
Nobody was ever buying that, and, she and I were never like that anyway. We switched classes in kindergarten, we were caught in 5 minutes flat, and then that was the end of that.
It's funny though because people really do to this day mistake my mom for you.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, your mom was chased down the street one day by an unhappy defendant that I happened to prosecute, and the she had a knife and she was chasing your mom. Thankfully, your mom was faster, but she was yelling, "You put me in jail," and your mom's yelling behind her, "That was my sister. That was my
Here's
sister."
her address.
Right, exactly.
So, I mean, you had such a successful campaign, you come into the office, the attorney general's office, and you just start tackling things.
Yeah.
I mean, do you wanna get into one of your biggest high profile cases?
Yeah, it was the Sandusky investigation. I mean, that was massive. We had the Pennsylvania lottery being sold to the British that we had to deal with. We had same-sex marriage that we had to deal with. We started a new mobile street crimes unit to deal with the drugs. I started a child predator unit for all of the online predators and, going to try and meet up with children. And so we were tackling human trafficking at the same time. It was a lot, and that was just my first 6 months.
You must have felt, like, on top of the world, right? I mean, at the time, you were so successful, you had your kids and you had a husband, and that climb must have been intense, but so worth it once you got to the top.
So worth it. I remember coming home from work on my 2nd day, and I remember Chris, the boy's dad, saying, "How is how is work today?" And I said, "I love it." Before noon, these are all the things we did, and it was that office is so diverse. You get to deal with, civil rights issues and criminal issues and consumer protection issues, and it was fascinating, and I loved it.
What do you wish you learned at the beginning of your career that you only learned at the top?
At the beginning of my career as a prosecutor,
Yeah, as a prosecutor.
you know what? The top really you know we say that because it's kind of like, it's a metaphor, really. You don't ever feel like you're on the top. You really just feel like, okay, I have a job to do. It wasn't like, oh, wow, look at me. This is great. I feel on the top. Life, life was good. There was no doubt. Looking back, life was really good. And, sometimes you want to say to yourself, oh man, what did you do? Life was good. You didn't need to rock the boat like you did. But at the same token, I'm proud of what we did. I'm proud of the example that I've given to other girls, maybe, who knows, or even to my own sons. It's kind of like this podcast. I don't know whether a lot of people will take something away from it or just one. But to be honest with you, just one is good enough. It's it's kind of what you have to do as a human being, like we said.
Yeah, you can really find the strength in pain, especially in just you telling your story. I mean, I could tell it's up and down a little bit, and saying the top, it must have felt like it to some degree, but maybe after the fact. They say you don't really know it's the glory days until you're out of it.
Well, that is the truth, right?
Mhm.
Because you don't, unless we're grateful people, thank God, but you
Mm.
don't feel like, oh, this is the top. This is fantastic. I'm doing great. You don't feel like that. You're moving on to the next thing, or you're coming home to, the boys used to FaceTime me when they were having a fight. I'd be like, oh, we just did this with same sex marriage. And then I'd be on the phone, get off your brother, stop fighting like that. And so it really was a roller coaster ride, but some people thrive on that. I happen to be one of them. So I don't feel like I need to go home and go to bed after it. I'm kind of like, what's next?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So to wrap up this episode a little bit, let's keep this imagery of you rising to the top. When you get to the top and now looking back now, were there warning signs during that climb that, the top's gonna be a little bit shaky? I think there's gonna be a drop off
Yeah.
unexpectedly.
Oh, absolutely. There were warning signs in the campaign. There were warning signs my very first day in office, and there were warning signs all along. And they weren't even subtle warning signs. They were like in your face warning signs. And I also felt it beforehand. I felt that my time there was limited. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I can't even explain that. But the rise was, especially when I always, even with the news media, I felt like, when they start talking about for governor or on the presidential ticket in 2020, I know as just a citizen that they are building you up so they can take you right back down again. And I remember when that newspaper article came out, it was either governor or presidential ticket. I remember saying to Chris, oh boy, here we go. Now they're going to come after me. And it was just the way it goes, quite honestly. I mean, you look back through history and sometimes you feel like you're the only one and, you want to single yourself out as this, victim, but it's happened all through history. And there was no doubt it was going to happen to me. I had no idea how. I didn't know when or where. It was like you don't know, where they're coming from or what's exactly going to happen or how bad it's going to be, but you can feel something's coming. You could feel the storm is a coming.
So the next episode, I really want to hear at least one example of the warning sign, like not just the gut one, the one you said that was so blatant. But while we wrap up, if you could give a piece of advice to someone chasing their big break right now, what would it be?
It would be exactly what we just talked about. Don't worry about what's coming. Don't try and second guess yourself. Don't be afraid of the storm. Don't let fear stop you from moving, taking that one step forward or those 10 steps forward. You know, Fear, we will talk about fear in other episodes too, because it's gripping and it could be debilitating and it could stop you. But if you let that stop you, then you're giving into something that may never come forward. And even if it does come forward, you may think you're never going to be able to face it. You may think that you'll never live through that day, but you actually do live through that day. And you'll realize then that when you look back, okay, these things that caused your fear, they were far less important than maybe some of the things that you did do or that you did accomplish. So my advice would be fearless.
And those are powerful words for those of you who don't know. Kathleen went from being in the attorney general's office, being the attorney general, to sitting in a jail cell.
Yeah.
So if you're saying Just keep going, don't worry about it, just keep going. That's
My f my friend, the former lieutenant governor, used to say, he quoted Winston Churchill, and it was something like, "If you're in hell, just keep going." Thanks, everyone, for joining us on another episode of Flip the Script. This is Through the Hurricane. I'm Kathleen Kane. Hope you join us again next time. Thanks for listening to Through the Hurricane. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.